Hello everyone and welcome to our Historic Influencer assignment for NPH 101, brought to you by me, Yumna, and my partner Natalia. Today we will be talking about Rebecca Davis Lee Crumpler and how she paved the way throughout medicine and her contributions to naturopathic profession. Throughout the presentations, we're going to touch on 6 key points. The first one is historical context, followed by the key points of her life, her significance to society, medicine, and the naturopathic profession, interpretations and contributions, how this perspective persists today, and we will end off with the lessons to be learned. To start us off, I'm going to talk about the historical context. So throughout the historical context, there emerged 3 intersecting themes when I was doing research and learning about her life. The first one was the theme of women in medicine. So the first woman to attend and graduate medical school was actually Elizabeth Blackwell, and this happened in 1847. And she paved the way for other females who also wanted to do the same and become doctors. However, what's really interesting to note here is that Rebecca was actually an African-American woman. And so not only was she female, but the fact that she was African-American presented yet another challenge, as very few African-Americans were allowed to attend medical college. And throughout her life, this kind of showed up through criticisms that she experienced and the interactions that she had with other people. And relating to that, or intersecting with that, was the theme of the Civil War. So after the Civil War, there was more demand for medical care, and this actually helped open opportunities for women in medicine just because there was such a high demand. And then added on top of that was the way that Elizabeth Blackwell kind of paved the way for other females to kind of go into the healthcare field. And so again, that opened opportunities for many women, Dr. Rebecca being one of them. The third theme, which relates to the Civil War as well, is the theme of African American rights. So throughout the Civil War and afterwards, there was the civil rights movement, right? This movement of freeing slaves, and not only was there more of a demand for medical care after the Civil War, but there was also specifically care needed for the freed slaves. So they needed a lot of care, and that kind of specifically opened doors for African American women, such as Rebecca, to be involved in medicine, to become a doctor, and to provide care to these individuals. And the key points of her life was that ever since she was a young child, she recognized her gift of healing because she had watched her aunt care for and cure others. And so this was a dialogue that she had with herself, is that she was going to do the same thing as her aunt did. And so from a young age, she had already kind of decided what she had wanted to do with her life. And I find it really interesting that despite these obstacles that she experienced being a woman and being an African-American woman as well, and an African-American individual, despite those kind of blocks or challenges, she still pursued her dream, the dream that she had when she was a child. And so throughout her early career, this is actually what helped her when she was facing adversity, both as a woman and as a African-American individual, because she experienced a lot of criticism, and quite frankly, she just experienced a lot of ridicule. So, they used to call her MD, and of course, this is a title that's designated to a medical doctor, but a lot of men jokingly refer to as mule driver. And so that was one of the ways that she was insulted. And because her focus was on providing care for freed slaves, she had moved to Joy Street, Boston, because that's where a majority of the African-American individuals were residing. And so that allowed her to kind of go into the specialty and to do what she really wanted to do, which was kind of focus on the demand and the care that was needed throughout the Civil Rights Movement, after the Civil War, and after the freeing slaves. She also started working for Freedmen Bureau, which also kind of provided her a focus or specialization in working with other African American individuals. So her significance to society, medicine, and naturopathic profession kind of evolved throughout the key points of her life and the historical context that she was working in. As I mentioned, that despite the adversity and despite the challenges that she faced, she still persevered. And I think that's one of the biggest contributions that she kind of made to medicine, because that perseverance allowed her to give that gift of her healing and, to use her knowledge to help others heal. Not only that, but she focused a lot on the teaching aspect of it. So she educated women on pregnancy, on childbirth, and she wrote a book of medical discourses, which, she wanted to reach not just her patients, but she wanted to reach as many individuals, as many African American women as possible, so that they could be educated on pregnancy, childbirth, fertility, hormones, and all of these topics, as, they were shunned, they weren't, the doctors didn't listen to them, or they were told they weren't. And so doing that allowed her to reach a lot of individuals. And throughout her work as a doctor herself, she actually worked with thousands of individuals. A lot of them were freed slaves. And she focused on this doctor as teacher principle, where she just educated them on what they could do for their health. And throughout her acting as doctor as teacher, her focus was largely on disease prevention. So she would mention, for example, one specific thing that she would say is that, take cough syrup as a kind of last resort, or don't focus on that as it contains certain toxic elements that can be harmful. She focused on lifestyle, she focused on nutrition, and she focused on treating the whole person. So she approached health from this holistic perspective and gave diet and nutrition advice, again, that was very much tailored to working with freed slaves, and that also allowed her to integrate this whole mind and body connection, which was very much needed for freed slaves, which had not only endured physical trauma, but emotional trauma as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Natalia, and I'm going to be taking you through the second half of our presentation today on Dr. Rebecca Davis Lee Crumpler. This quote by Dr. Crumpler really stood out to us as it exemplifies Dr. Crumpler's philosophy behind practicing medicine. So first, let's take a look at how Dr. Crumpler interpreted and contributed to the principles and philosophy of naturopathic medicine, the modalities of the profession, and the concept of health and disease. So we identified 3 key themes, first being emphasis on prevention, second, inclusivity and accessibility in healthcare, and third, education. Dr. Rebecca Crumpler was undoubtedly an incredible woman who made remarkable contributions to medicine and society during her lifetime. While she was not actually a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Crumpler practiced medicine in a way that we believe aligns perfectly with many of the key aspects of naturopathic medicine. First, Dr. Crumpler's concept of health and disease was that prevention is a much better strategy than treatment. She believed that disease-causing factors could be prevented, and emphasized the importance of diet and nutrition, as well as accessibility to proper medical care. Dr. Crumpler insisted that prevention was a better strategy than treatment, and her focus was always on, quote, the possibilities of prevention, end quote, which was the central tenet of her book on medical advice. She advocated for families of all incomes to receive proper medical care, as well as diet and nutrition advice that could ward off premature mortalities from serious diseases to household incidents. Likewise, she contributed to the principles of naturopathic medicine by practicing inclusivity and accessibility. Dr. Crumpler primarily treated women and children, who at the time were not considered equal with men. Further, she focused most of her life's work on treating free slaves in Virginia. Indeed, she paved the way for inclusivity in medicine by being the first Black female physician in the U.S., an accomplishment she may not have even understood the remarkable significance of. When she entered the field, she was one of 300 women in a field of over 50,000 physicians, and she was the only Black female. Dr. Crumpler faced extensive prejudice, racism, and backlash, yet she persevered in her mission to treat. At the end of the American Civil War in 1865, approximately 4 million formerly enslaved Black Americans were left without proper housing or access to medical care. Refugee camps were popular at the time, with devastating diseases like cholera and smallpox ravaging the poor conditions of the widespread tent cities. It was in these conditions that Dr. Crumpler found her calling and touched the lives of so many. It is estimated that she treated thousands of formerly enslaved Black individuals who were going through the transition from slavery to freedom. Her experiences working in Virginia with freed slaves allowed her to cultivate a remarkable understanding of medicine and disease, primarily relating to the treatment of women and children. Lastly, it is clear that Dr. Crumpler exemplifies the naturopathic principle of docere, doctor as teacher, in that she published a medical book with the hope that it would be accessible and useful in every household, not just for medical doctors and the affluent. Her book, a 2-part text entitled A Book of Medical Discourses, may very well have been the first medical text by a Black American author to be published in the U.S. This 2-part text was created from nearly 2 decades of Dr. Crumpler's journal notes on her experiences treating thousands of patients. She witnessed so much suffering and premature death and sought to educate all on the life-saving power of preventative medicine. This is a key principle informing contemporary naturopathic medicine. Next, let's take a look at how this perspective persists today. So we know that an emphasis on prevention, diet, and nutrition is still just as important today as it was in the past. That is not something we can ignore just because of the progress that we've made in allopathic medicine. Next, a focus on inclusivity and accessibility in healthcare is just as relevant today as it was in the past. We know that all humans are different, and we cannot just treat according to a standardized model of care, which was typically a white male patient. And we're learning a lot more about different individuals and their different medical needs. So this is just as relevant today as it was in Dr. Rebecca Crumpler's time. I think it's quite interesting to note that it is only now in the 21st century that Dr. Rebecca Crumpler is being recognized for her incredible achievements and contributions to medicine. For the past 100 years or so, her contributions and accomplishments were not known. Lastly, let's consider the lessons to be learned from Dr. Rebecca Davis Lee Crumpler. First, our history needs to be reevaluated to acknowledge the contributions of previously silenced voices. I think it's crucial to consider that the history we know today is not necessarily the full story. There are contributions made by those who have been systemically excluded from historical texts, primarily females and people of color. Next, diet and nutrition have and always will be of primary importance in healthcare. We cannot ignore the fundamental need for a good health foundation, which lies in diet and nutrition primarily. Lastly, prevention is a lot easier and cheaper than treatment in the long run, and it can have some remarkable life-saving effects. So prevention is always a central tenet of good healthcare. And I'll leave you with this final thought. A focus on inclusivity and accessibility is still important today, but how can we ensure that everyone has access to quality healthcare?